The sneeze guard is the most important invention in this entire story, and almost nobody thinks about it. That long, low panel of glass tilted over the food, the thing you ducked your head slightly under to reach the mashed potatoes. That piece of angled glass was the whole business model made physical. It said, "This food is out here in the open, unguarded, yours to take as much of as you want. And the only thing standing between you and infinite mashed potatoes is a sheet of glass designed to keep your breath off the serving spoons." That glass was a promise. Come in, pay once at the front, and then the rules of a normal restaurant dissolve. No menu. No prices per item. No portion someone else decided for you. Just a long, gleaming line of steam wells stretching off toward the dessert station, and a plate in your hand, and the radical, almost utopian idea that you could eat until you were done. Not until the food ran out. Until you were done. For a certain kind of American family, in a certain stretch of the 1980s and 90s, that was as close to abundance as life got. And the place that sold it better than almost anyone was called Old Country Buffet. If you're under 30, you may barely know the name. If you're over 40 and grew up in the Midwest, the name probably just triggered something specific and physical. The smell of it, that warm institutional smell of steam trays and dinner rolls and industrial carpet, the sound of trays sliding, the particular soft roar of a room full of people eating without conversation because their mouths were full. Birthdays there, Sunday lunch after church there, grandparents who loved it because the price was fixed and the portions were their own business. It was, for millions of people, not a special restaurant but a fixture, the background of ordinary family life, as unremarkable and as permanent feeling as the mall it usually sat next to. And now it is gone, not struggling, not diminished, gone. Every single company-owned location closed. The name owned by a company that has openly said it has no plans to ever bring it back. You cannot go to an Old Country Buffet tonight if you wanted to. There isn't one. How does something that big, that woven into people's lives, vanish so completely that a whole generation doesn't even know it existed? The easy answer, the one everyone reaches for, is COVID. The pandemic killed the buffet. End of story. And the pandemic is in this story, near the end, and it's genuinely important. But if you stop there, you miss the actual murder, because Old Country Buffet was already a dead man walking years before anyone had heard the word coronavirus. The pandemic didn't kill it. The pandemic just found it already lying on the floor and turned off the last light. The thing that really killed it happened in a conference room in 2006, and to understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, to Minnesota, to two men and a very simple idea. The year was 1983. The place was Minnesota, and the two founders were named Roe Hatlin and C. Dennis Scott. Their idea was almost aggressively simple, and that simplicity was the genius of it. Take a big room. Fill it with a long line of freshly prepared, familiar home-style food. Fried chicken, roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, mac and cheese, rolls, a salad section, and a whole dedicated wall of desserts. Let people serve themselves. Charge one fixed, affordable price at the door. No waiters taking orders. No menu to agonize over. No check at the end with numbers on it that made you second-guess the second helping. You pay, you walk in, and the entire place is yours to graze. It borrowed from two older American traditions and fused them. One was the cafeteria, the institutional serve-yourself line that had fed workers and school kids and churchgoers for decades. The other was something more emotional, the Sunday supper, the big spread, the groaning table at Grandma's house where there was always more than anyone could eat, and going back for thirds was a compliment, not a shame. Old Country Buffet took the efficiency of the cafeteria and wrapped it in the feeling of the family feast, and sold the combination for one flat price. And here's why the timing was perfect, why this specific idea caught fire at this specific moment. America in the 1980s was suburbanizing hard. The malls were going up. The big box stores were spreading along the same suburban corridors. Families were moving out to the new developments, and everybody was driving everywhere. Old Country Buffet planted itself right in the middle of that. In the strip malls and shopping centers next to the retail, in the exact path of the suburban family's Saturday, and it offered that family something no full-service restaurant could match: total predictability of cost for a group of people with wildly different appetites. Think about the actual math problem a family faces walking into a normal restaurant. Dad's hungry, mom wants something light, the teenage boy is a bottomless pit, the little kid will eat 3 bites and abandon the rest. At a regular restaurant, you're doing anxious arithmetic the whole time, and the bill is a surprise. At Old Country Buffet, the anxiety evaporated. One price per adult, less for kids, and everyone, the big eater, the light eater, the picky kid, gets exactly what they want in exactly the amount they want. For a working class or middle class family watching its money, that wasn't just convenient. It was a kind of dignity. Nobody had to hold back. Nobody had to be the person who ordered the cheap thing. The all-you-can-eat buffet was, in its way, one of the most democratic dining rooms in America. The steelworker and the school teacher and the retired couple on a fixed income all ate the same unlimited spread for the same fair price. And there was a whole social world that grew up around that model, a set of little rituals that anyone who went regularly will remember. The strategy of the first plate. Do you load up on the good stuff immediately, or do a scouting lap first to see what's out today? The unspoken understanding that the fried chicken and the carved roast beef were the anchors and everything else was supporting cast. The kids who skipped dinner entirely and went straight for the soft serve machine, swirling it into the cone themselves, which was half the fun. The way a booth at a buffet became a base camp. You left your coat and your drink to hold the table and went off on foraging runs, and the table stayed yours all afternoon. The senior citizens who came right when it opened for the early bird price and made an entire slow social occasion of it. For a lot of older Americans on tight budgets, the buffet was one of the few places they could go and feel like they were being treated generously, where the abundance was real and the price didn't punish them. That mattered to people in a way that went well beyond food. People loved it, and the loving showed up in the growth. Through the 1980s and into the 90s, Old Country Buffet spread across the Midwest and down into the South, following those suburban corridors, opening location after location. By 1996, just 13 years after that first Minnesota store, the chain had grown to 252 restaurants, 252. That is a staggering pace, a genuine phenomenon. The kind of expansion that makes an industry sit up. And it's worth understanding for a moment how a buffet actually makes money, because the economics are stranger and more delicate than they look. On the surface, all you can eat sounds insane. You're inviting people to eat as much as they physically can for a flat fee, which sounds like a recipe for being eaten out of business. But the model works, and it works on a few quiet principles. First, most people eat far less than they think they will. The appetite loses to the eyes, and the average diner's actual consumption lands well under the price. Second, the cheapest, most filling foods get placed most prominently and most accessibly. The bread, the pasta, the potatoes, the rice, the things that cost the operator pennies and fill the stomach fast, while the expensive proteins are portioned, carved by a staff member, or simply set a little further down the line. Third, the sheer volume of a busy buffet lets you buy ingredients in bulk at rock-bottom prices and waste almost nothing, rotating it all through a high-traffic line. Run well, with the right food costs and enough customers moving through, a buffet is a genuinely profitable machine. It is a business of averages and volume and careful placement, and Old Country Buffet for a long time ran it beautifully. The profitability was real. The model was sound. Remember that, because it means what happened later was not the model failing. And the company behind it, Buffett's Inc., wasn't done. Because 1996 is also the year of the first big deal, and it's a deal that tells you something about the strange, incestuous structure of this whole business, a structure that becomes important later. In 1996, Buffett's Incorporated merged with a rival chain called Hometown Buffet. Now, on the surface, that looks like two competitors joining forces. Old Country Buffet dominated the Midwest. Hometown Buffet was strong in the Midwest too, and dominant on the West Coast. Combining them created an absolutely enormous operation. Combined sales of over $660 million, more than 300 locations, a coast-to-coast buffet colossus. It was a blockbuster. But here's the strange part, the part that's almost funny once you see it. Old Country Buffet and Hometown Buffet were founded by the same man. C. Dennis Scott, one of the two original founders of Old Country Buffet, had left in 1989 to create Hometown Buffet. He'd built one buffet empire, walked out, built a second buffet empire to compete with the first, and then, 7 years later, the two of them merged back together. The rival was the founder's other child. The whole thing was, in a sense, a family reunion disguised as a corporate merger. I bring that up not just because it's a curiosity, but because it tells you what kind of world this was. The buffet business in the 90s was a small, clubby, interconnected world of a handful of operators who all knew each other, who spun chains off and merged them back, who traded locations and brands like cards. It was a world built on growth, on deals, on expansion, on getting bigger. And that culture of relentless getting bigger, of merging and acquiring and stacking up locations, felt like strength. For a long time, it looked exactly like strength. There was one small omen, easy to miss at the time. On the very day that Buffett's Inc. and Hometown Buffet merged, the shares of both companies dipped, went down, not up. Maybe it meant nothing. Or maybe some people looking closely were already starting to sense something the crowd sliding their trays down the line couldn't feel. That there might be trouble in the structure of this thing underneath all the abundance. But that was years away from mattering. Through the late 90s and into the 2000s, the buffet empire looked unstoppable. And here's a thing I want to make absolutely clear, because it matters enormously to understanding what went wrong. The food was good and the customers never left. This is not a story about a restaurant whose food got bad and drove people away. Read the accounts and it's remarkable how consistent this is. Old Country Buffet was getting positive press as late as 2007. The quality of the food was still genuinely good. Some individual stores were racking up massive sales, huge volumes, packed dining rooms. By every measure of the actual restaurant, is the food good? Do people come? Do they leave happy? Old Country Buffet was healthy well into the 2000s. The dining room was working, the idea was still landing. The sneeze guards were still gleaming and the steam wells were still full and the families were still coming in for Sunday lunch. The restaurant was alive. It was the company that was about to be killed. And those are two different things, and the gap between them is the whole tragedy. I want to dwell on that gap for a second, because it's the single most important idea in this entire story. And it's the thing that gets lost every time someone gives you the lazy version. There is a restaurant, and there is a company that owns the restaurant, and we tend to talk about them as if they're the same entity. They are not. The restaurant is the physical thing. The room, the food, the staff, the customers, the actual daily act of feeding people. The company is a financial structure that sits on top of the restaurant. The ownership, the debt, the leases, the corporate strategy, the decisions made in rooms far from any dining room. A restaurant can be completely healthy while the company that owns it is dying. The food can be good, the customers can be loyal, the dining room can be full and happy, and none of it matters if the financial structure on top has been engineered into a death spiral. That's exactly what happened here. The people sliding their trays down the line at Old Country Buffet in 2007 were participating in a healthy, functioning, beloved restaurant. They had no way of knowing that the company above that restaurant had already the year before signed its own death warrant. The dining room was thriving. The corpse was upstairs. You just couldn't see it from the buffet line. Because in July of 2006, the deal happened. The one that did it. The fatal one. Buffett's Incorporated, the Minnesota company that owned Old Country Buffet and Hometown Buffet and a steakhouse chain called Tahoe Joe's, merged with a South Carolina company called Ryan's Restaurant Group. Ryan's was itself a giant, another huge buffet and grill operation with more than 300 locations of its own. Put the two together, and you got a monster. One of the 5 largest casual dining companies in the entire United States. 675 restaurants across 42 states. On paper, it was the crowning achievement of the whole buffet era, the biggest buffet company that had ever existed, a coast-to-coast empire feeding millions of people a week. The deal was valued at $876 million. And here is the crucial phrase, the phrase that contains the entire death of the company, and I want you to hear it clearly. $876 million, including debt. Including debt. That's the whole thing. That's the murder weapon, right there in the fine print of the press release. Because to do that merger, to buy Ryan's, to staple these two giants together into one enormous company, the combined entity took on an enormous mountain of debt. It borrowed huge sums to make the deal happen. And from that moment in July 2006, the company was no longer just in the business of selling all-you-can-eat dinners. It was in the business of servicing a colossal pile of debt. Every single day, before it made $1 of profit, before it could reinvest in a single store, the company owed enormous payments to its lenders. The debt sat on top of the whole operation like a stone, and it never got lighter, and it demanded to be fed no matter what. And you have to understand how badly debt and the buffet model fit together specifically. Remember, the buffet is a business of thin margins and high volume. It makes its money in small increments across enormous numbers of customers on carefully controlled food costs. It is not a high-margin business. There is no fat in it. A buffet dinner might cost $8 or $10 or $12, and the profit on each one, after the food and the labor and the rent, is slim. The whole thing runs on moving huge numbers of people through the line. So a business like that has almost no capacity to absorb a giant fixed debt payment on top of everything else. A high-margin luxury business can carry debt. There's room in the numbers. A thin-margin, high-volume buffet has no room. Loading massive debt onto a buffet chain is like loading a cargo ship's worth of freight onto a bicycle. The vehicle was never built to carry that weight. It could carry the food. It could carry the customers. It could not carry the debt. And the people who did the 2006 merger either didn't understand that or didn't care, because the goal wasn't to build a stronger restaurant. The goal was to be the biggest, and being the biggest in a low-margin business financed by borrowing is just a fast way to build the most elaborate possible thing to collapse. This is the thing that never sat right with me about how this story usually gets told, and I want to stop and hammer on it, because it's the heart of everything. People say the buffet died because Americans' tastes changed, because we got more health conscious, because fast casual places like Chipotle came along, because the buffet felt dated. And there's some truth scattered in all of those. But none of them is why Old Country Buffet specifically collapsed when it did. The company collapsed because in 2006, it loaded itself with a debt so large that the business underneath, a good business, a business people still loved, a business whose food was still good and whose dining rooms were still full, could not possibly generate enough profit to carry it. The merger didn't make the company stronger. It made the company fragile. It took a healthy operation and strapped a bomb to it. And the timing could not possibly have been worse, because do you remember what happened in 2007 and 2008? The financial crisis, the Great Recession, the worst economic collapse since the Depression. So picture the position this company was in. It's 2008. You are a buffet empire carrying a mountain of debt from a merger you did at the absolute peak of the market 2 years earlier. Your customers are working class and middle class families, precisely the people getting hammered hardest by the recession, the people losing jobs and cutting every discretionary dollar, the people who suddenly can't justify even the modest splurge of a buffet dinner. So your revenue softens at the exact moment your debt payments are strangling you. You have no cushion, because the merger ate the cushion. You have no room to maneuver, because every dollar is already promised to a lender. Things hit the crisis point fast. In 2008, Buffett's Inc. filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The debt from the Ryans merger, colliding with the recession, was simply insurmountable. The company began closing restaurants, not because those restaurants were failing as restaurants, but because the corporation on top of them couldn't carry its debt. Stores that were serving good food to happy customers got shut down anyway, sacrificed to feed the financial machine above them. And this is where the story becomes something genuinely bleak, something that stops being a normal rise and fall and becomes something stranger and sadder. Because the company did not die in 2008. It came back, sort of. It restructured, shed some debt, closed some stores, and emerged from bankruptcy. And then it did it again, and again, and again. Bankruptcy in 2008. Bankruptcy again in 2012. Bankruptcy a third time in 2016. And then a fourth time at the very end, in 2021. 4 trips through bankruptcy court in 13 years. There's a term for what Old Country Buffet became in these years, and it's a brutal one, but it's accurate. A zombie chain. A company that dies and is reanimated and dies again, never quite alive and never quite allowed to rest. Each bankruptcy killed off more stores. Each restructuring passed the wounded body to a new owner. The Minnesota founders were long gone. The company got sold and resold through a series of investment firms and holding companies with names that mean nothing to anyone who ever ate there. Vita Nova Brands, FMP Management, Fresh Acquisitions, Distressed Asset Specialists, firms that buy broken companies cheap and try to squeeze something out of them. Watch what the chain becomes in these hands, because it's a pattern you see over and over in these stories, and it's grim every time. Once a company enters this zombie state, once it's just a distressed asset being passed between financial owners, nobody in charge actually cares about the mashed potatoes anymore. Nobody's thinking about the Sunday supper feeling or the dignity of the unlimited plate. They're thinking about leases and asset values and which underperforming locations to shed and how to extract a little more before the next filing. The soul of the thing, the good food, the warm, crowded dining room, the founder's simple, beautiful idea, becomes irrelevant to the people steering it. The restaurant and the company have completely divorced. The restaurant, in the stores still standing, is often still fine. The company is a corpse being operated by people counting its remaining parts. And you can feel that divorce in the little decays that creep into a zombie chain. The things regulars started to notice even when the food itself held up. The carpet that doesn't get replaced. The booth with the tear in it that stays torn. The dessert station that used to have 12 things and now has 8. The location across town that closes, so now the nearest one is a 30-minute drive instead of 10. The staff that gets thinner, because corporate is squeezing labor to make the debt payment, so the line doesn't get restocked quite as fast, and the empty tray sits empty a little longer. None of it is dramatic. None of it makes the news. It's just the slow, grinding underinvestment of owners who are managing a decline rather than running a restaurant, pulling money out, putting nothing back, letting the physical body of the thing wear down because there's no reason in their math to maintain something they're planning to strip. The customers felt it as a vague sense that the place wasn't quite what it used to be. What they were actually feeling was a company that had stopped believing in its own future. And through all of this, locations kept going dark, often with no warning at all. This is one of the cruelest recurring details. Employees and regulars would show up and find a location simply closed. Franchisees struggled as corporate support dried up. The great coast-to-coast empire, 675 restaurants at the 2006 peak, bled out steadily, store by store, bankruptcy by bankruptcy. By 2019, before anyone had heard of COVID, the whole group was down to roughly 90 stores across 27 states. From nearly 700 to 90, the empire had already mostly collapsed. The zombie had already lost most of its body. It was staggering along on a fraction of what it had been, carried by momentum and by the genuine loyalty of the customers who still came, still loved it, still didn't know that the thing they loved was already structurally dead. That's where the buffet was, down to 90 limping stores, 4 owners deep into its zombie years, hollowed out by debt and serial bankruptcy, when the pandemic arrived. And the pandemic, for the buffet specifically, was not just another blow. It was uniquely, precisely, almost poetically lethal, in a way it wasn't for any other kind of restaurant. And this is worth slowing down on, because it's the one part of the story where the format itself, not the finances, delivered the killing stroke. Think about what a buffet actually is, mechanically. It is a room full of strangers, sharing serving utensils, breathing over open trays of communal food, walking up to the same surfaces again and again, touching the same tongs and ladles and spoons that hundreds of other people touched that same day. The entire concept, the shared, open, self-serve, communal spread, is, from the standpoint of a respiratory pandemic, a nightmare. It is close to the single worst possible way to serve food during an airborne disease outbreak. The sneeze guard, that founding piece of glass, was designed for a gentle, everyday version of exactly this fear, and it was nowhere near enough for what arrived in 2020. So when the pandemic hit and the public health orders came down, self-serve buffets weren't just discouraged. In most places, they were specifically, explicitly banned. Not restaurants in general, buffets in particular. The self-serve line, the thing that was the entire foundation of the business model, the whole reason Old Country Buffet existed, became illegal. Overnight, the core mechanic of the company, you serve yourself, unlimited from the open line, was outlawed across the country. A normal restaurant during the pandemic could pivot. It could do takeout, delivery, curbside, outdoor dining. It could survive on a fraction of its normal operation while it waited for the world to reopen. But how do you do takeout for an all-you-can-eat buffet? The entire value proposition, the unlimited self-serve line, cannot be boxed up and handed through a car window. You cannot deliver as much as you want. The business model didn't just get hurt by the pandemic. It got specifically, categorically outlawed. The one thing it did, the only thing it did, was banned. And notice the awful precision of it. The pandemic didn't attack the buffet's weakness. It attacked the buffet's entire identity, the exact feature that had made it special for 40 years. The openness, the sharing, the communal, self-serve, help-yourself abundance that was the whole emotional heart of the place, the thing that made it feel generous and democratic and warm. That openness was the point. And in 2020, that openness became a public health hazard, a thing to be feared, a thing governments specifically prohibited. The buffet's greatest strength was converted overnight into its fatal flaw. There's something almost cruelly ironic in that. The sneeze guard had always been a quiet acknowledgement that shared open food carries a little risk, a small piece of glass managing a small everyday fear. And then a virus arrived for which that small fear was suddenly the whole ballgame, and no sheet of glass on earth was going to be enough. For a healthy company with cash reserves, even that might have been survivable. You close for a while, you burn savings, you wait, you reopen when the orders lift. Golden Corral, the big buffet chain that did survive, weathered it partly by having the strength to adapt, temporarily switching to cafeteria-style service where staff plated the food, riding it out. But Old Country Buffet had no reserves. It had no strength left. It had spent 15 years being bled by debt and passed between distressed asset owners and dragged through bankruptcy 4 times. It had no cushion at all, because the cushion had been eaten in 2006 and never came back. So when its core business model was banned and the cash flow stopped, there was simply nothing left to fall back on. The zombie finally had nothing left to reanimate with. In early 2021, the parent company, by then called Fresh Acquisitions, along with Buffett's LLC, filed for bankruptcy again, the 4th time since 2008. And this time, it wasn't a restructuring to fight another day. This time it was the end. The filing cited around $13.5 million in debt it couldn't pay. And it took down everything, not just Old Country Buffet, but all the sister brands stacked up under the same ownership over the years. Hometown Buffet, Ryan's, Furr's Fresh Buffet, Fire Mountain. The whole zombie empire, the accumulated buffet brands of 3 decades of mergers, all of it closed. Essentially every location gone, except for a handful of Tahoe Joe's steakhouses in California that were a different kind of business. The intellectual property, the name, the brand, the rights to Old Country Buffet got bought later in 2021 by BBQ Holdings, the company behind Famous Dave's. And BBQ Holdings said plainly that it had no plans to revive the brand. It bought the name and let it sit. None of the old locations reopened. The empire that had once been one of the 5 largest casual dining companies in America, that had fed millions, that had 675 restaurants across 42 states, was reduced to a dormant trademark owned by someone who has no intention of using it. So there is no Old Country Buffet tonight. There is no sneeze guard to duck under, no steam well of mashed potatoes, no dessert wall, no fixed price at the door that lets a whole family of different appetites eat until they're done. It's all gone, and most of the buildings are something else now. The strip mall boxes reabsorbed into the churn of American retail, a phone store here, a discount furniture outlet there, the ghosts of the buffet line invisible under new flooring. And with it went a whole texture of American life that's genuinely hard to replace. The buffet was one of the last truly classless dining rooms, a place with no VIP section, no bottle service, no way to buy a better experience than the person at the next booth. Everyone got the same line, the same price, the same unlimited plate. It was where you could take a big family on a small budget and nobody felt poor. It was where a kid's birthday could be a real event without anybody going broke. It was where old people on fixed incomes could sit for 2 hours and feel welcome and full. That kind of place is vanishing from America generally, and Old Country Buffet was one of its great monuments, and now the monument is a furniture outlet. When people online say they miss it, I don't think they only miss the fried chicken. I think they miss what the room represented, a version of eating out that didn't make you calculate, didn't make you perform, didn't make you choose between feeding your family well and feeding them affordably. You just walked in, and there was more than enough for everyone at a price you could pay. That's rarer than it used to be, and its rarity is part of why the loss stings. Here's what I keep coming back to at the end of it. Everyone wants the lesson of Old Country Buffet to be about the buffet, about how the all-you-can-eat model was doomed, how American tastes moved on, how the pandemic exposed a dying format. And there's a version of that which is true. The buffet was aging. The 2000s were not as kind to it as the 90s. Fast casual was rising and the culture was shifting. But I don't fully buy the tidy version, and here's why. The customers were still there. The food was still good. The dining rooms were still full, in the stores that were allowed to keep operating, right up until the format was literally outlawed. People never stopped loving Old Country Buffet. Go online even now and you'll find people aching for it, sharing memories of it, trying to recreate the recipes because no official cookbook was ever published, mourning it like a piece of their childhood, which for a lot of them is exactly what it was. The demand didn't die. The love didn't die. What died was the company. And the company died because in 2006, at the very top of the market, it chose to take a good, beloved, healthy business and bury it under a mountain of debt in pursuit of being the biggest. And that debt turned a strong operation into a fragile one. And the fragile one couldn't survive the recession. And the recession-battered version couldn't survive being passed between distressed asset owners through bankruptcy after bankruptcy, and the exhausted, hollowed-out shell of it couldn't survive a pandemic that specifically outlawed the one thing it did. The pandemic gets the blame because the pandemic was standing there at the end. But the pandemic just delivered the last tap to something that had been pushed off balance 14 years earlier, in a conference room, in a merger valued at $876 million, including debt. Including debt. That's where it died. Everything after that was just the long, slow falling. And I think there's a reason we're so quick to blame the pandemic, or blame changing tastes, or blame the format. A reason that goes beyond just not knowing the details. It's more comfortable. It's easier to believe that Old Country Buffet died of natural causes, that it was a dated concept whose time had passed, that the world simply moved on the way the world does. That version asks nothing of us. Nobody's at fault. It's just the tide of history. The harder version, the true one, is that a good business, feeding happy people, was deliberately loaded with debt it couldn't carry by people chasing the prestige of being the biggest, and then handed down through a chain of financial owners who strip-mined it for whatever value remained while letting the actual restaurants wear down. That version has villains in it. Not cartoon villains, not people who set out to destroy anything, just people making rational financial decisions that were completely disconnected from the thing they owned. Decisions that treated a beloved restaurant as a number on a balance sheet. And the number on the balance sheet is what they optimized, and the beloved restaurant is what died. That's a less comfortable story because it suggests the death wasn't inevitable at all. It was chosen in increments by people who weren't thinking about the families in the booths. And maybe that's the real thing to sit with. Not that the buffet was a bad idea. It was a wonderful idea, a genuinely democratic and generous idea, feeding every appetite at one fair price under one sheet of gleaming glass. But that a wonderful idea, and good food, and loyal customers, and full dining rooms, all of it, everything that actually matters about a restaurant, can count for nothing against a decision made far above the dining room by people who wanted the company to be bigger than it needed to be. The families kept their side of the deal. They kept coming. They kept loving it, right up until the day they showed up and the doors were locked and nobody had told them because the people who owned it by then had long since stopped thinking about the families at all. The food was still good. That's what gets me. The food was good the whole way down. The fried chicken didn't fail. The mashed potatoes didn't fail. The people who came didn't stop coming, and the people who worked the line didn't stop showing up, and the families didn't stop loving it. None of the things that a restaurant is actually made of failed. What failed was a spreadsheet, several layers of ownership removed from the smell of that dining room. And it turns out a spreadsheet can kill a restaurant just as dead as bad food ever could. Deader even. Bad food you can fix. You cannot fix a debt load, or an owner who's given up, or a virus that outlaws your reason for existing. So the buffet went dark with the food still good, the sneeze guard still clean, the memory still warm in a few million people who will spend the rest of their lives telling their kids about a place those kids will never get to see. That's the whole story. Good food, loyal customers, a beautiful, simple idea, and a decision made far above the dining room that none of it could survive. The families kept their side of the deal right to the end. It was the company that walked away, a